58 with no money saved for retirement. That is the position that a family member that I have is in currently. Well, when I say no money, I mean not enough, not nearly enough. They have less than 100k saved for their retirement. And guess what? They're 58. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, because of the fact that if you're internally living off of your investments when you retire, you're not going to get enough return from your investments in order to be able to retire comfortably or decently, right? So on 100k, if that's fully invested in the S&P 500, that's 10% a year on average, so 10k a year. Now you tell me who's able to live a life on less than £1,000 a month, even with no mortgage, even if you kept your expenses very low. It's just simply not enough to live a life fulfilled, right? Especially later on in life when maybe healthcare becomes an issue, and getting it up and around is not as easy. So you need support. Now, it's very peak because for that family member, they also have kids. And that means that it's very likely that if they don't change their current circumstances, the burden to look after them is going to fall onto their children. And their children also have kids. They're a family, right? They look after the kids. And so now they're stuck in a position where they have to look after their own young children and their old aging parents. That's not fair, is it? Like, I know that for a lot of people who come from African, Asian, Hispanic backgrounds, looking after your parents is part of the tradition, it's part of the culture there. And that's fine and very well, but we live in a very high cost society in Britain and in the US and in Western nations compared to back home in these other less developed countries. And so to afford the healthcare is a lot more difficult. Families are more spread out across the country or spread out across the globe even as compared to back home. So it's not as easy to just have a brother or a sister or an uncle or auntie just around to look after aging parents. People have work, they have responsibilities. And so you who live in the Western developed nation need to make sure that you are investing for your retirement. So what did I recommend for this family member? I told them that, listen, this is the very hard truth, what I just explained to you guys. You need to get off your butt and start investing aggressively. Ask them, how much can you afford to invest from now, 58, until you retire, around 65, so 7 years. And they said around £500. Now, when I run the numbers, £500 invested from around 100k, and averaging 10% in S&P, ends up around £258,000. Now, when you run the numbers further on, that's currently in a SIP. If you take that lump sum, put that in an ISA, that's also getting 10%, and then you're just, withdrawing from your SIP. It's the returns on the investments that your SIP are making, that 10% there, that averages around £2,000 a month on retirement income. Now, £2,000 a month, is that a lot? No. Is it enough to get by? Possibly. Is it a dignified retirement? Well, if you don't have the state pension to add on to that, then probably not. So I said, listen, you're going to have to invest more aggressively. Even if the government gives you a 25% bonus on your SIP, that £500, taken up to 620 or 650, sorry. That's still not enough. You're going to have to bump it up, make it 800 possibly. And if the government tops that up by 20%, that takes your contributions to £960. Now, after 7 years, when you invest that amount, it grows to £308,000. 10% off of that sits at around £2,500 a month as retirement income. Now, how does that sound? It sounds a little bit more comfortable, right? After you take care of your bills, after you take care of expenses, you're left with a big chunk of change that you can use to look after yourself, go out, gift grandchildren, children, go on holidays, that sort of thing. You're not living a frivolous life. Like £2,500, like I think that would equate to around just shy of a £40,000 salary, around about there. which is decent. It's more than the average starting salary in the UK, which is around 333,000. But really and truly, that assumes that you get 10% of the market and you are extracting all that 10% return each year. Now, as we know, the S&P, the stock market in general doesn't give you 10%, pumps out 10% each year. Some years it's higher than 10%, some years it's lower than 10%, some years it's negative. And withdrawing 10% each year puts you at the very high risk of blowing through your investments due to, a systematic sequence of return risk, right? If when it comes to 65, you have a series of bad years in the market, which ultimately dwindle your investment retirement pot in those early years, it means that you're not going to have enough. Your retirement's not going to last, the 30, 40, 50 years it could do if you withdrew a smaller percentage. I think the research suggests around 4% withdrawal rate. That means that would allow your investment portfolio to survive, I think, 90% of situations that could occur in the stock market, that like 60 years in the future, you'd still have money to live off of. However, at the end of the day, the goal is to get this individual investing, because if they don't, then unfortunately, they're not going to be able to retire. And even when they try to, it's not going to be a dignified retirement that they thought they may have. The sad truth is that they should have started years ago. And fair enough, I understand that, Gen Z and our generation, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, we're privileged to have social media and the internet that provide so much information when it comes to investing, stocks, shares, crypto, and how to get them started, right? So we have the luxury and the privilege of time on our side to allow compound interest to work on our side. And I guess it's better late than never. So just sharing these numbers with them has given them hope. And I took charge of their portfolio and reallocated their investments to more aggressive growth type ETFs, because what they had invested in currently, high fee structure, low returns. And that's not what you want, especially when you start investing at 58. Now, there's no single stocks in there, obviously. However, I'm not gearing the portfolio towards bonds and precious metals, because when you start this late, what you need is growth and aggressive growth. Obviously, not stupid growth, not stupid with carrying stupid risk. Now, if my thesis plays out and they do retire at 65 and they have this £308,000, that's fantastic for them. The great thing is that they also have a partner. They also have a partner. So it's not just them. It's also their partner's retirement income that will go hand in hand. So if their partner has just over £100,000 in the retirement, they also have a workplace pension that will pay them out 1.5k a month. So if they combine both of their retirement savings and investments, on the high end, they could have around £5,000 to £6,000 each month. If they withdrew all 10% of their income, they got the state pension and they got their workplace pension. On the low end, they could have around £3,000 if they stuck to about a 4% withdrawal rate. They didn't get the state pension, but they still got their workplace pension. 3k a month is just shy of around £4,500, £45,000 a year income. See, for two with no mortgage, no kids, and retired, and slowing down, it's a decent retirement. You're not going to be going on cruises and 12 holidays a year, of course, but you are going to be able to pay your bills. You're going to be able to put food on your table, maybe a holiday a year, maybe a small one, and a nicer one. and you're not going to be in the streets. That's the important thing. However, if healthcare diminishes and you wanted to go into private healthcare or a retirement home, unfortunately, £3,000 a month is not enough. Even £6,000 a month, if both of you were in there, is not going to be enough. Because I think the average cost of long-term healthcare is around £80,000 a year, which would just blow through the majority of people's retirement savings. Now, this is scary. This is very scary. However, the important thing is to start. No matter how old you are when it comes to investing, no matter how far gone, as long as you're still capable and able to work, you still have years of compound interest that can benefit you. Even if you start at 60, 61, I know people who are starting at 61 and investing. It does mean that you may not be able to retire when you think you may be able to retire. You might have to push that back further. And unfortunately, that is the hard truth, the hard reality, right? So if you are watching and you're not 65, or you're not 58, you're younger, you're in your 20s or earlier, or your 30s, you have so much time for compound interest to work for you. Listen, you could, if you have children, you invested £50 a month for them. By the age of 18, they'd have around £30,000. And if they took over that ISA, junior ISA or investment, that £30,000, and continue to invest at £50 a month, nothing more, they'd be a millionaire by 55, right? Which also happens to be the time at which SIPs, self-investment pension plans, or portfolios, I can't remember the second P stands for, mature, and people are able to access their SIPs. So, people, really and truly, you could retire your child by 55 with just £50 a month. If they didn't, if they decided to pull out the money, well, that's enough for a deposit for most houses. That's enough for university for a couple of years. That's enough for a wedding, and more. So you can set your children up by just doing that. And for yourself, if you want to retire early, that's fine. £500 a month invested over the course of 30 years, averaging 10%, also sends you to just shy of a million. Bump it up to 35 and you're sitting at over 1 million years. So if you're in your 20s and you want to retire by 55, you can still do that. Ladies and gentlemen, don't knock the power of investing. You don't want to wake up one day and be 55, 60, 65 and not enough in retirement, because the state pension isn't enough to keep you going. It's £12,500 a year, which is just basically £1,000 a month, which is not enough. So if you have been making enough NI contributions and you've got your workplace pension also there, then you might be scraping the barrel when it comes to your retirement, Yeah, you need to be investing aggressively when you're younger. You don't want to be in this situation at all. However, there is hope at the end of the day, at the end of the tunnel, if you have started later in life. It just means you need to be investing more money than you would have if you were younger in life, if you started older, because you don't have the luxury of time on your side. So, with that being said, guys, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more videos on my channel, because I'm personally invested. The question is, are you?